Hello, Business English 3 students. Welcome back after your break. This week, I mentioned we were turning back to ourselves and away from some of the big picture elements, and we're going to focus on loans. So, we've largely been active as investors this semester, and at this point, further along in the investing world, it becomes apparent that sometimes you got to, in order to make some money, you have to spend some money, or in order to make some money, you have to borrow some money, and that's where loans come in. So, I imagine at this point you've looked at your books, and as is often the case in our history, the book is a little bit lacking. There's a lot of legalistic language here, and some brief elements about conditions of the loan. That's number one here on page 155. But after that, it has a few elements like remuneration, repayments, and prepayments, and then a bunch of legalistic language, and then the exercises begin. So, this week I'm going to post this video along with the notes, so hopefully that will be helpful, and the assignment as well. Your assignment essentially is to take out a loan. So that we can get there, and you feel comfortable taking out a loan, we have to first talk about some of the basic elements of a loan. And really we're going to split this into two different categories. So one of those is basic considerations or elements, like what do you have to decide, what do you have to think about, and what do you have to know, and what does the bank have to know before you can consider making a loan. You have to establish these elements before you establish further elements. The second group of elements is remuneration or compensation or payback, which is you have to establish some kind of structure so that the loan can be paid back over a certain period of time. That's one of the components. So let's begin with the basic considerations and elements. One of these things is called the principal. The principal is basically the amount being asked for. So if you want $40,000, and that's the total of the loan, that's called the principal amount. Principal often means like leading or most important, and that's really what it is. That's one of the first and fundamental considerations and the most important figure in the loan process. So some of the other considerations, and if we were in class, I think a lot of this stuff is common sense, and I would ask you to give these to me, and this would take a little bit longer, but I think in a way we'd have more chance to think about it. So instead, I'm going to post the notes, and I'm going to talk about each of these elements a little bit. So one of the other fundamental questions is, what currency? Because if you want 40,000 of something, 40,000 what? Do you want euros? Do you want dollars? Do you want dinars? Then we have to consider that that is not the only money that's going to be involved. Banks are famous for having fees, and very likely there are going to be quite a few. So some of the most important ones are, well, I mean, basically the bank is performing a service. Not only are they giving you a loan in money, giving you, right? But they are providing services. And anytime a bank provides a service, it's generally going to charge a fee. So that can happen at the beginning of the loan. That's where many of the fees are triggered. And then during the life of the loan and at the end of the loan. So we have calculation fees, application fees, signing fees, commitment fees, management fees, that's over the life of the loan, and then finally finishing or termination fees. So another thing that we've talked about before, but is important for a loan, is collateral. We saw this at the beginning of the semester when we talked about how debt is created in the first place in the modern economy. A collateral, remember, is something that you pledge that is valuable. It's a form of security so that if you do not fulfill the loan or you violate the contract, then the bank or the issuer of the loan can get that. So you pledge it as part of the contract. Usually what you pledge is what you're taking the loan for. So if you're trying to take a loan for an apartment, for example, and at some point down the line, and you pledge that as collateral, and at some point down the line you can't meet your financial obligations, that collateral can be seized by the bank. We're going to talk a little bit more about repercussions in a few minutes. Now, another important point is the purpose or the type of loan. There are a lot of different loans out there, and they have various criteria, sometimes individual laws governing them, and we're not going to get too heavy into that. It's not legal English, it's business English. But you have auto loans, mortgages, which are real estate or house loans. You might call them home loans. You have student loans. There are a great variety out there. And so when you think about the purpose of them, then they often going to fall into a certain type. But there are also cash loans and consumer loans, easy cash loans. And generally, the more you throw cash in the name, the worse they are for you. In the longer term, larger and more secure assets that you're trying to purchase with the loans, the more likely you are to get better terms. But that also depends on some other things, which we're about to talk about. The last thing before we talk about what determines some of those elements of the loan is the jurisdiction. So generally, the country in which the loan is issued becomes the, what I would say, jurisdictional area, is the place whose laws govern the loan. Now, all of these things are often dependent on one particular thing, and that is, who are you, right? It may seem a little bit too personal, but the bank wants to know a lot about you before it gives you a loan. You should also want to know a lot about your bank. So really the next two categories, and the most important, I think, when we think about basic considerations and elements, are who are you and who are they? They being the bank, you being you, right? So essentially their fundamental question is, are you going to be solvent? And solvent means basically, are you going to have enough liquid assets or cash or money to continually meet your financial obligations during the length of the loan and pay it off fully in the end plus the interest? And then the bank, you should be worried about is, can they also lend you that money without going under? Because if a bank goes under because of its debts, then it's going to call on your debts, and there's going to be elements in the contract which may force you to pay them earlier than you'd otherwise agreed to. So really, when you think about status and are you going to be solvent, then there are important elements that the bank wants to know, and they can be pretty detailed. So often they'll want proof of employment, and of course with proof of employment, proof of income. How much are you earning? That's not the only thing that determines how likely you are to pay the loan back, and some of these get quite personal. So are you an account holder at the bank itself? That's less personal. What kind of accounts do you have? And of course, how much is in your account? So your net worth comes into play there. What other stuff do you own? Not only liquid assets, like what is in your bank account, but what other elements do you own? Some of what you own, you've gained through previous loans. So they want to know how you've paid back previous loans. So a history of your previous bills and loans and how you've paid them back, because everyone has a credit rating. And that credit rating is between 0 and 800, and the bank has it, and you have it whether you know it or not. The closer you are to 0, the worse off you are. The closer you are to 800, the better potential receiver of a loan you are, and the more likely you are to pay it back, and that's the way the bank sees it as well. So basically, they want to know if you're employed and can you pay it back. Now, there are some other further considerations which are important, like, are you legally documented there? What's your national status? What kind of passports do you have? Do you have any dependents? Do you have any lingering financial obligations? Do you have any other loans pending? Do you have bills that you haven't paid? So all that is, who are you? Proof of employment income. Are you an account holder? Do you have dependents? What is your age? Sometimes you can be prevented from getting a loan based on your age, or if you're a student or a non-student when it comes to student loans. So this is the beginning of loans. These are the basic considerations, elements before you can go into getting a loan. In the next video, I'm going to talk about remuneration and how you calculate that, as well as your assignment for this time.